Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, realtors. I'm very happy and excited to share and spend some nice time with you guys covering the California statutory disclosures. For most of us, we'll be covering the residential standard sale, 1 to 4 unit transactions. And we're really just going to be uncovering how we're going to properly disclose whether we're representing a buyer or seller. It's important for us realtors to understand what are required disclosures for the every transaction that we do and what are optional but highly suggested or broker recommended. So this is a great class for you to be here today because I will cover broker recommended ones and how we can mitigate risk, how we can better protect our clients by giving them more disclosures and additional information for that they should, resources that they can go understand. And there's a lot of different things out there. Like, is it mandatory to send a buyer a supplemental as a tax notice of your supplemental tax bill? That's not required. It's not statutory, but it's a nice gesture to let your buyers know that after they purchase the property, and because the calendar, uh, the 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 counties operate on a fiscal year of July 1st to June 30th, that they will receive a supplemental tax because all the counties and cities want their additional tax revenue from the sales. And it's important to explain it, and it gives them a link and where they can search this stuff. There's also additional risk forms regarding, for example, acting against broker advice, because many times our buyers often try to save money. They wish to bring a friend that they trust or a handyman to help them inspect the property, for example. And so they'll bring their handyman who says, "Oh yeah, you got to fix this. You got a problem with the roof, or you have a couple of items here and here and here," and they'll verbally tell them. But a lot of times, these friends don't write a formal report up, and they're not following ASHI or CREA home inspection standards protocol. So, because it's an unregulated industry, I feel that there are many opportunities for a transaction to add risk when buyers make risky decisions, when they decide to waive a contingency at the time of purchase. Like, I don't care what it appraises for, I'll waive my appraisal contingency. Okay, that's fine if they want to do that, but we must advise them prior to writing and sending that offer out. There are risks to that. What if the property does not appraise for the full value? Do you have additional funds to, if they're doing an 80-20 loan, they're only going to get 80% of the appraised value. Do you have additional funds to make up for that? Okay, great. If you do, okay, I understand. Wow, you're waiving your loan contingency? That's risky. I don't recommend you. I strongly uh, encourage you to keep it. Or if you're trying to compete with another buyer, I have to give you this form to let you know that there are risks of waiving your loan contingency. Or if, for example, sight unseen. I've heard that many times. The buyers from out of state, let's say they're coming from Seattle or something like that, they buy in California, but they don't have the opportunity or time to visit the property. Oh, can you just do a video walkthrough, Kelvin? And I say, I can do a video walkthrough. The problem is I don't like sight unseen, where you physically haven't walked the neighborhood, the community. You haven't seen the neighbors, or you haven't met with any, various physical aspects, because my opinion of things could be very different on your opinion on condition or usage or the potential. Because I might like busy urban neighborhoods, and I don't mind having children around and a lot of cars driving by. And then for you, you want a really quiet neighborhood. That's my opinion versus yours, and I can't capture everything in one 15-minute video. So these are things to consider when you're practicing real estate out there, advising and consulting. Let's understand statutory disclosures, mandatory things that we should be doing in our transactions, and additional risk management practices that we should be implementing to make sure that we don't get sued or complained upon after we've transact. Okay, so that's the overview of what we're covering today. Any questions so far? All right. Thanks for those of you who joined me. I see Lan, Sylvia, Gina, JL, Julia. Happy to have you join us. I'm going to go into our car library because we all use typically the car RPA purchase agreement. And because of that, it already nicely summarizes and puts together mandatory and statutory disclosures, labeling what is important and required for us. I put together, I like to use the summary chart when I teach because it lets you understand what is the disclosure requirement as per California civil codes. And this one also takes together federal requirements as well. For example, Fair Housing Act. That's something that, you know, can't discriminate against any parties, stuff like that. So this is going to be where we start from, and I'm going to start going down the list. But yes, and this is going to be comprehensive. So I'll brief through the important items. But yes, we do have to advise that, and in all properties that we do in our brokerage, we want title insurance in place. Okay, it's a requirement that they do have, that the buyer knows that they're going to get free and clear title on the property. That's the safest way to ensure that there's not going to be any problems or long lost relatives who try to claim title in the future. So that's a title insurance. That's really the importance of it. Now, obviously, if we're selling a 1 to 4 unit, when we do that, we do need to give a agency disclosure form. Standard procedure, which is already automatically attached to our offers. And if you do a lease that's 1 year or above, you have to give agency disclosure. And if you're doing an income property that's like a sixplex, you still have to give an agency disclosure. Okay. So these are the duties and notes right here. And they should sign this or receive it prior to signing their offer. If you give the offer simultaneously with the agency disclosure, that's what a lot of agents are doing, but technically you're behind. You're technically supposed to provide the agency disclosure when you first engage with a client. So if it's a buyer, I would provide that form to them when I do my first showings with them, informing them what an agent does and what's a buyer's agent's duties. And it's not a contract, but it's just good practice to provide it, because a lot of times buyers may choose to work with another agent, and oftentimes you're going to be left out on the transaction when you don't build a client relationship, agency fiduciary duties, and establish yourself as their buyer's agent. And if you're a seller's agent, I'd like to give it to them included with my first visit with them. When I give a consultation or do a listing presentation, I let them understand what a listing agent's duties are too. So very simple, very easy. It's not a very tough form to get signed. It's not asking them to pay you a commission, for example. There are other California Civil Code disclosures that are mandatory for a seller to provide or a buyer to receive. And the great thing is our NHD report, Natural Hazard Disclosure Report, helps us with this duty and helps the seller provide these disclosures. That's why we like them in every single transaction. So if you're located to a close proximity to an airport, the NHD report will satisfy this. The Fair Appraisal Act addendum is added to a lot of our transactions. It basically means that every appraisal is independent and it's an unbiased opinion of value. And this is attached in their RPA. So just letting people know what this is for. if I give you any, responses, please raise your hand or interrupt me if you have questions. Okay, otherwise I'm just going to go right on to the next one. I want you to learn, so make this interactive and go ahead and let me know. So if there's a flood zone, yeah, that's important to know if you're a buyer. If you're next to the Santa Fe Dam or there's a lot of dams in Los Angeles. We actually, just for the background, California built the biggest network of aqueducts and dams, and because we are naturally a desert area, and a lot of our water is coming from Northern California along with the Colorado River. So if we have a lot of these dams around and reservoirs, sometimes they fail. Hopefully they don't, but it's an opportunity of risk that every insurance company knows about. And so therefore it's in your NHD disclosure, whether you're in a flood zone. This broker's statutory duty, this is a requirement to inspect the property of everything that's 1 to 4 units. We have no exemptions. We don't have any ability to alleviate us from this duty, except for never occupied properties where there's a public report. What does that mean? Okay, that means even if you sell a personal property mobile home that's regulated by the Department of Motor Vehicles, or if you sell a regular duplex, every agent has a duty to do an AVID. Agent Visual Inspection Disclosure is the form that we should use. And this is any reasonable areas that you can access. You don't have to do the attic, the basement, crawl space, nothing like that. You don't have to move any furniture or carpet rugs. All you have to do is walk through every room by room by room and closets and check it and see if you see anything that's a defect or a significant material item that the buyer should know if they overlooked it. So you have an extra set of eyes that can help the buyer, whether you're a listing agent or a buyer's agent. It's the same duty. And this is important that you put it in writing and you note anything that you describe. Please use as few adjectives as you can. Objectively, just write the location that you found it. What does it appear to you? And remove your adjectives. So I don't say large crack. I don't say small crack. I just say a crack exists next to the south window. All right. And go ahead and ask me questions because this is an important area if you have anything on the AVID. But if you go room by room, I'm letting you know that the listing agent does the AVID, for example. And I've seen many buyer's agents say, oh, yeah, there's an AVI done. AVID is completed by the listing agent. And if I'm a buyer's representative, that does not mean I just take his list AVID and copy it or use that. That is basically laziness on your behalf. So you need to walk through that same property because he's going from his opinion and you need to go from your perspective. And that's very, very important because it's a listing agent and a buyer's agents both have the same duty. Don't just copy what the other person wrote and don't just go off the home inspection report and go, oh, okay, the home inspector looked at this. Oh, I'll write these too. It's okay to add stuff from the home inspection to supplement what you found. That's okay because they have photos and references that are nice and helpful. But you want your buyer, whether you're listing or buyer side, I don't care. These buyers should understand that there are some existing defects that you have pointed out, or the listing agent pointed out, or the inspection pointed out. Any questions on this? So when you go to your TDS, transfer disclosure statement, there is a box. I never want you to just write and leave it blank. I want you to check the box and say AVID attached. Go ahead and fill in your AVID, see my AVID, and then go ahead and share it with the client and get it signed. Now, the cool thing is there are certain instances that a TDS is not required. That's called seller exempt. But even though the seller is exempt from certain disclosure duties statutorily, that does not relieve you, the agent, from doing your ABID. You still got to do that duty. There's no exemptions. It's already written on there. Okay? Any questions? Now you have a carbon monoxide disclosure of compliance, and simply it's because of the carbon monoxide and garages having potential for danger and whatnot. We have a mandatory form. This is just a simple understanding that this duty is code compliance, safety compliance, that the carbon monoxide must be present, one per story per floor, and this is something that an appraiser is going to be looking for. So you might as well get it done earlier, and so that you don't have to get a reappraisal visit and additional fees when it's not present on the property. Now, if you're in a commercial property, then there is an earthquake guide. This is mandatory for certain commercial properties that are built before January 1st, 1975. It is mandatory that a seller, to whether they live in there or not, if there is a death in the last 3 years, this does apply for all sales, all leases, and rentals of real property. Notice how it doesn't say, well, I have a commercial restaurant and some murder happened or someone died on a heart attack on the table at the restaurant. That's still real property, guys. So if even businesses or rentals, you still got to give a disclosure on death in the last 3 years. There is one exception, and that is if the person died due to causes of AIDS or AIDS-related HIV, then you don't have to disclose death in the last 3 years. That's the one exemption they have. Okay? Any death. So, and if you have any questions, you can always click on this link regarding AIDS. But you can see here, any death of a 3-year period must be disclosed because that is material. There are so many people who have a fear of ghosts or very superstitious. The other exclusion that is not listed on here, but I can tell you it applies, is if there's a death on the property and let's say the owner tore down the entire structure all the way to the foundation, because there's possibility, and I still advise you to check with a car hotline. There's a possibility of disclosing that death that you don't have to disclose it because now the structure has been 100% fully torn down. But I still advise you to check with the legal hotline. No discrimination is allowed, and any discriminatory covenants that, for example, San Marino says no person that's of non-Caucasian race can buy here. Those are all federally deemed invalid and violates fair housing laws. So whether you see it on the title report or not, it doesn't matter. All these discriminatory covenants do not apply. This is across all real estate in the world, in the United States. Earthquake fault zone must be disclosed to buyers. So this is also already applies in the natural hazard disclosure report. So that's where you still should give this disclosure and order. They're very inexpensive reports. They range from $69 to $100. And you can get all of these disclosures provided with current studies and mapping to the buyers. Any questions? This law is repealed, so I'm not going to cover the energy use report. And if you're close to a farm or ranch, that's also important for the buyers to understand, and that's already in their NHG report. Now, if you sell a property 1 to 4 in which there is an FHA financing, if you're doing that kind of loan, then there is a form that must be provided, and that's Form HID. This is a for your protection. It's important to get a home inspection, and this is just a nice book. You practically should do this in every transaction. Recommend the buyer to get a home inspection, even in brand new construction. So this is the form to use every time you want to provide your buyer. Hey, it's important to get a home inspection. Give them the HID. Okay. When the buyer decides to or elects to waive a home inspection because they're acting against your advice, then you would also then add Form BIW, Buyer Inspection Waiver. It is a duty federally that there is withholding taxes for foreigners. And in California, there also is withholding tax sometimes because not all foreigners pay taxes or report their taxes. Therefore, the government also tries to make sure that they get their sales tax revenue for every sale. And the way they do this is they instruct and mandate escrows to withhold up to 10% of the gross sales price and send it to the IRS. And California, if you add it up, it also is 3 1/3% of the gross sales price if there are foreigners. And that way, the government will have the revenue, and the taxpayer slash the seller will be able to file taxes the subsequent year and redeem and claim if there's any additional refund that they get, which there should be. They can report any commissions and sales expenses and anything that they did for the property over the time, get the adjusted cost adjusted basis, therefore claim and pay only the gains portion, and it'll be calculated on their tax form, which we realtors are not experts or CPAs. Therefore, they must rely on their tax professional to guide them through this process on tax advice, guidance, consulting. But we can give them the form, guys, and there's a form about it, and that's your FERPTA form. Okay, right there. Any questions? Defensible space is now a duty for all properties that are in a high or very high fire zone. So when you're in the TDS and if you are in a high fire zone, then you have to give an additional defensible space compliance type of report and fill it out. And this will be found on your fire hardening defense space form, FHDS. And the buyers can go out, they can get a report with Cal Fire or the fire department and inspect the property to see what are the areas that are not in compliance and should be corrected. For example, maybe they have vegetation within 20 feet of the structure, or maybe they have some trees that are touching the roof. Those are all violations, and they, because of all the recent fires in California, this is a way to protect communities. And so if you're built before 2010 and in the high fire zone, it is required to have some home hardening things done. For example, non-combustible roofs materials. So if you have wood shake, that could be very combustible to fire. And so therefore they want you to change it to maybe a different type of roof material later on. So these compliance things, you can find a lot about it in defensible space law. There's a Q&A that explains this to the buyer and seller. What are the duties and requirements and what does it mean to have defensible space? This all just passed recently, just a couple of years ago. So this is just something that in beginning July 2025, the homeowners in these high fire zones will be required to become in compliance. So they're giving a nice period of time since 2020, 5 years times to let people know. And in 2020, they may start doing regulation, enforcement, investigating properties and sending the violation notices that your weeds are too high, that your trees are your bushes are getting too close, and all this extra stuff. Okay, so that will become a retrofit. Get your old home in compliance with various materials and non-combustible sources of improvements. Okay, so that's that. The flood disaster insurance requirements. Sometimes, if you are in a flood zone, they will add additional requirements for home insurance. That's additional risks. So the insurance provider will have additional premiums that will be paid by the homeowner. If you're in a gas or liquid pipeline zone, that's also required for every contract of single family homes because there has been a gas pipeline breakage. For example, 2 years ago, this occurred, or 3 years ago, I think it occurred in the city of, anyways, my friend bought a property there. Um, Near Signal Hills, there's an area. Anyway, there's SoCal Edison had a tremendous amount of leakages of old pipes that they did not repair, renovate. Eventually, these gas lines did seep gas into the air and to the soil, and a lot of homes were deemed to be hazardous. And therefore, because of that situation, a lot of people had to claim and get moved out, and there's a whole mess. So that city had and everywhere where there's gas and pipelines, there's always a potential where the the gas company fails to or chooses to work on their operating budget and will delay mandatory um, checks and emissions and various types of inspections because they don't have enough funding. Okay. Now, there's not much to know on groundwater basin adjudication notices, but all it means is if if your seller has ever received one of these notices, then they have to disclose this as a material fact from the seller given to a buyer. Okay. So just like if you ever receive a violation notice against the property and the city says, hey, seller, or not, hey, homeowner, property owner, you have a violation notice. A neighbor has reported that you have an illegal addition, or you have a fence perimeter issue dispute. And if these are ever notices received, this is a significant material item. And if unresolved and the seller never did anything about it, these notices and letters and violations all should be passed over to a buyer as material fact about the property. Home energy rating system booklet. This is optional disclosure. There's a booklet in your uh, car library. Go to sample library of e-publications, and you'll find this in the combined hazards booklet. Also there, you will find the Homeowner's Guide to Earthquake Safety. This is a mandatory booklet that you should give to every transaction. I don't even care if it's what year it's built. It's just nice to give to every buyer, no matter what year. But if it's built before January 1st, 1960, this is the requirement. You give the booklet and the additional disclosure requirements. So this booklet will have a bunch of 100 plus pages of information to read. And if you're selling a property in 1 to 4 units, you also got to let them know it's in an industrial use zone. Or so if it's near an industrial use zone, that's already in your SPQ questionnaire and the TDS. So if I across the street from me, like Lower Azusa Road, there's a bunch of residential on one side and there's a bunch of industrial on the other side. So therefore, that's in a industrial use zone location nearby a proximity, and it's also in their NHD report too. But the seller does not want to get the impression if they go like they're on Lower Zusa and they disclose it's not in industrial zone, the NHD report says it is, that's conflicting disclosures. So try to be as consistent as possible. So go line by line and make sure that the seller is properly disclosing the truth, not just checking the box and trying to do it as fast as possible. Spend the time wisely. My advice to you agents is to let the seller know, please don't just skim over this really quickly. This is really important transfer disclosure and SPQ disclosures that that is your opportunity, seller, to disclose any known material facts about the property, violations notices, anything you want to share. So that way that you share these things, you will not be held liable for what you disclosed, because now the buyer has knowledge of it and shall do own due diligence regarding any disclosures. So here's your opportunity to disclose and alleviate any risks in the future. Everything, even if you did an illegal water heater without permit, if you change your windows without permit, I don't care what the modification they've done to the property. If they did an addition illegally, great, disclose it. It's gonna make you sleep better at night, and you'll feel better about the property, and the buyer will find this out anyways. It's better that they find out from you than they find out from some random city person who's gonna tell them and scare the hell out of them, right? The lead-based paint form is next. If you built before January 1st, 1978, many manufacturers of paint may have included some lead inside it. And if unremediated and they haven't removed it, it's potentially hazardous, especially to young babies and children. So that's why 1978 and before, we always give this lead-based paint form. Material facts has its own section, and material facts is broad in its own generalized category. You and I may have different opinions on what's material, but anything that we consider significant, I'll tell you, if you as a realtor believe it's important or should be disclosed, my answer to you is yes, disclose it. Okay. So what is that? Anything that the definition, anything that affects the value or desirability of the property. Whether or not something is deemed material is determined by case law. So here's an example that I think is very broad, because I've done this. I'm selling a great property, single family, and I'm selling it to a buyer. However, I know, because I've been to the property as a listing agent, and I know their neighbor right adjacent to me has 7 dogs. And every time I go, some of them are large dogs, or they're like bulldogs, or Labradors, or very dangerous dogs, pit bulls. And they're yappy too. This has nothing to do with this property that I'm selling, except it's next to it. Do I disclose this? The answer is yes. Okay. Because I feel it's important to me. If I'm a buyer buying this home, I'd like to know that there's dangerous dogs next door, and they're all, there's annoying, or they're loud. So, because every time I walk in the backyard, they're going to be, busy barking. So the buyer probably already seen them too. What's the fear in disclosing it, that there are multiple dogs in the property to the north? Disclose it. That's material. Okay. Oh, I'm a 3 houses parcels away from a golf course. And occasionally, maybe 2 times a year, I'll receive golf balls. It's called errant golf balls in my backyard. There are times where these golf balls will hit your window and break them. They'll hit a roof, or they'll break something, and they might even hit your head. So if you don't disclose adjacent or near proximity to a golf course range, it's a failure on your behalf. Okay. So there's stuff like that. Has nothing to do with the property, but because of its physical vicinity or location of something else, you should probably disclose it. Same thing like close to a electrical tower. They could be cancerous or something like that. You don't want to be responsible for not sharing that it's within 300 feet of a large transformer or a power utility pole. Then you might be, it's important to at least let them know. They see it already anyways. Okay. Now, the cool thing is, if you're doing residential 1 to 4, then you're going to use form SPQ. If you're going to do commercial property sales, then use commercial SPQ. If you're going to do vacant land disclosures, the seller should write it on the vacant land questionnaire. And if you're doing agricultural property, the seller agricultural land SPQ type is here. Okay, they just re-acronymed it. Megan's Law is a duty of disclosure. There are sex offenders in California. There's probably one on your street that you live on right now. And because of this requirement disclosure, it's already in RPA, it's already in the statewide buyer and seller advisory, but there's a link to check every address, and you can find it easily using this website link. So my advice to you listing agents, don't use the link. Because if you listing agent check the Megan's Law, now you have actual knowledge that the neighbor has a sex offense against them. Now you have to disclose it on your AVID. Mello-Roos, 1915 bond assessment. There are many properties that have Mello-Roos, so it is important to disclose special secured levies and taxes against the properties. And you can find this in your seller's property tax bill if there's any Mello-Roos or special assessments that is charged on the property. Okay. If you have meth labs in the history, that's a requirement to disclose to a buyer. Okay, even if you remediated it, you still got to disclose it. Military ordnance, that will be taken care of in your NHD disclosure. Okay. Mining operations, also NHD. Mold. This is an important topic because mold is everywhere. But whenever you sell or lease or rent, you don't have a disclosure requirement except for if you have actual knowledge, a known defect. See, the seller must disclose actual knowledge of toxic mold on the property. And the seller will says, well, I see black marks on the shower grout, but I don't have actual knowledge this is mold. I'm not a mold expert. Well, then you can use Form RGM to supplement your transaction. If the seller got a sample test study, that's actual knowledge. But if they never got a study sample done, then, and it looks like mold, you would write, black substance found in the upstairs shower all throughout the grout. Okay. And then let the buyers understand. And now you disclose that there's a location of something that they should investigate. So the natural hazard disclosure statement will have all these mandatory requirements, special flood hazards, this and that, blah, 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 blah. So that's why we always want it in all of our transactions. And pest control is not a required duty in any sale transaction in California. It's a negotiable item. And if you do get any termite reports before or after or during your escrow period, all reports must be shared to the buyer. Okay. If you get a second opinion and you want to use the lower cost one, you still got to give the higher cost opinion to the buyer. Okay. Private transfer fees. This is also a disclosure duty to a buyer, and title reps should be able to find if there's any private transfer fees, or you could do a prelim if you're a listing agent. The environmental hazards booklet, this is optional disclosure. It's in the combined hazards booklet, so that you always just use the combined one. Seismic hazard zones will also must be disclosed. That's in your NHD report provided. Smoke alarms must be in compliance. So local laws could be more restrictive. All real property dwellings must have smoke alarms located outside each sleeping area, bedroom. There is some point of sale requirements. There is a requirement for the appraiser to pass safety appraisal stuff. So these are all areas that should be inspected and provided to a buyer, letting them know. And you can use the smoke. There's a WHSD form, water heater and smoke disclosure, to share with the buyers to let them know that it's in compliance or not. Special flood hazard area. This is also a special flood hazard in your NHD if applicable. But if the seller already knows they're in a NH, they, for example, when they purchased the property, they received an NHD report probably. So the seller can never say, I don't know if it's in or not. They received this form. They should just refer to it, keep their old documents. And if they don't have the old one, that's why you're going to run a new one and buy a new NHD report. So states like California have fire hazard areas that are state responsibility areas that are separated from the federal responsibility. Quite recently, Judy Chu was able to Congresswoman Judy Chu, that's her proper title, was able to successfully make the Santa Anita trails and the woodland areas become federal responsibility, and therefore converted them from state to federal, which helps with the funding, and it became a nice hiking trail area, blah 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 blah. Anyway, if you're in a state designated area, states don't have a lot of funding. And there are many state responsibility areas like forest areas, um, probably a lot of areas in Big Sur, for example. So all of those things are very susceptible to high fire zones, and you got to disclose if you're near there to a buyer. Okay. Supplemental property tax. I talked about this in the beginning of the uh, training today. And the seller or seller's agent must deliver this notice to the buyer as a statute. You can use Form SPT as an optional way. It's also included in your statewide buyer and seller advisory. So this is where you can provide and let the buyers know, hey, don't forget, 3 to 6 months later after you buy, there's going to be another notice from the county asking you for additional property tax. And the subdivided land law, in this situation, when there's a subdivision that happens, there is a requirement, and the seller has to go apply for a final public report to make sure that it's anyway, the builder goes through the Department of Real Estate to do any subdivided and maps, and the builder does all this complicated stuff. But they take one parcel, divide it into 5 PUDs, sell each PUD separately, and now the buyer will get a public report to ensure that it's been passed. So you'll get this stuff when you build, when you buy a new construction. And anyway, just know that there's a subdivision map act, and builders have additional requirements that they go through with their architect. A TDS required for 1 to 4 units even applies to manufactured homes and personal property mobile homes. So there are a few exemptions when a seller does not have to do a TDS. I will cover this a little bit more in detail because I get questioned on this all the time. If I'm selling 5 units, do I need to do a TDS? The answer is technically no, but does not alleviate the seller who has known material facts. Remember, so if there was, for example, a death on the property, or there is a insurance claim based on a big water leak from one structure, one unit to another unit. Maybe there's a fire that occurred from a tenant and it burned down this one section of the home. Oh, but I don't have to do TDS. That means I don't have to disclose. No, that's not correct. They still have to disclose known defects, even if it's corrected. So you would share that. You could still share it on a piece of paper, but it's nice. You can still use the TDS or the SPQ to provide that knowledge if you have knowledge. Now, there are certain situations where a seller may not have to, they're exempted from giving this form, and that's a probate sale. I'll go one by one. Probate is when there's a death on the property and the true seller died, for example, probate, and now his property is given to a beneficiary or an administrator of a trust or a court appointed person who will handle the sale. In those situations, a court ordered person or a beneficiary or a relative who've never lived on the property, They don't have to provide disclosures because they very likely do not have knowledge about the condition of the home. If you're an REO, for example, REO is a bank that foreclosed on a home against another property owner. So they never lived on the property either. And the administrator or the signatory for the bank that does not have very much knowledge about the property. Therefore, they will also not disclose what limited information they have. Okay, they just seize this property based upon the borrower defaulted. If it's a government-owned property, they're exempt from the TDS. So, for example, the post office might be downsizing, and the post office sells their building to publicly. They don't have to provide the TDS. If a school wants to sell a portion of their land, they don't have to provide a TDS. So bankruptcy proceedings, these are also exempt, and some trusts, not all trusts. So you can see the TDS Q&A for details if you want to know what type of trusts are exempt. I could tell you that if the sellers form a trust, they have lived on the property, they are not exempt. Because they lived there, they still got to provide disclosure TDS duties. Any questions? Well, those of you in class are now well educated on these requirements. If you're in a very high zone, that's in your NHD, yes, you have to disclose this. Very high. Water conserving plumbing fixtures. Whether or not the property is being sold, this is not a point of sale requirement at the moment, but every property built on or before 1994 should contain water fixtures that are in compliance and trying to conserve water. Now, not all properties have retrofitted. Not all properties, this is not a point of sale item that must be done prior to sale, but a buyer needs to know that their property may be subject to it, and they later on may need to retrofit their property for low flow water toilets and shower heads and fixtures in the future. So someday they might make this a code enforcement issue. Perhaps if we're in a severe drought again. So you disclose this, let them know, and there are exemptions. If you're a historical property site, then they're exempt from retrofit. And if it's certified not technically feasible to retrofit by a licensed plumber, those are sample exemptions. Going on the next one, it was water heater bracing. So many people have to do a reappraisal or whatnot because they just simply don't get dual straps on the property. It has to be strapped to a stud. It has to have a drip pan and a exhaust a condensation line pan coming out. So this is all just standard duties that I don't expect you to know, but you should be able to spot it if you don't see it. Do you know? Okay. Do you guys know what a proper water heater looks like? Let's take a look real quick. I'll show you an image. So there has to be 22 gauge thickness of two metal straps around the property and around the water heater, I'm sorry. And one should be on the upper third and the other one should be on the bottom third. And if I take a look at the images, here's what it looks like. Okay. Um, this diagram here shows you is properly strapped. It's on a stud. And these are the proper measurement thickness. Yes and no, right? And when you're looking for a drip pan, just so you understand what you're looking for, here, this is a drip pan. Okay. However, in California, they want you to have this water heater raised on a 2 feet or above as per code. So this is not in compliance in California. Okay. So that's what a drip pan looks like. This is a condensation line right here for exhaust. That way you have water dripping into it. Okay. That's just a little code learning today for us. Now let's go back to the summary chart. window security bars and safety release. So if you install safety bars on a property, guess what? That's not a safety exit if it hasn't been retrofitted with a release mechanism from the inside. So if someone's in your apartment building, 2 bedroom, there's a fire in the kitchen, living room, they can't escape from the front door. Every property needs to have a way to escape secondary exits in case of fire. And sometimes it's windows. But if you put a bar there, there have been people who have died because they couldn't release the safety bars. Okay. Wow. Okay, we covered a lot of disclosures. Any questions on these items? I got some questions in the chat. Let me see. Okay, Sylvia says, want to share with a group of additional signatories form when signing the AD if there are more than 2, 4, 6 buyers, death on the property, or just a death. Okay, so what Sylvia is saying here is a lot of times we will sell a property to 4 buyers. They could all be family members or partners, I don't care. So if that's the case, then there is a way to properly put this together. So for example, I had a transaction here in Redlands, okay? Now in this transaction, if you notice that there is a purchase contract, you'll notice that there's only 2 areas to put 2 buyers' names. Look right here. Here's one of the buyers' names right here, right? And oftentimes we may have 4 buyers that may have to buy a property. If that's your case or your situation, you go to your RPA, you go to the buyer's box right down here. And if you have more than 2 signers, like 3 or 4 or 5, you would check this box. Put the first 2 people who are, I guess, whoever you want, but I guess people who are going to be borrowing the financing, the 2 primary candidates, is better to put them up front. And then for buyers 3, buyer's name 4, buyer's name 5, I would list their names on Form ASA. So the zip form just tells me ASA is now added. I can go back into my forms, go to the ASA, and I'll show you what to do. So for example, if this buyer was buying this property along with the first 2 buyers, I would say this is signatories to the RPA. Check that box. And then I would write the reference date of when I wrote the property, and then here's the property address, and this is the seller's name, and this is the buyer's name. So you would add in a buyer and write each of their names here. Buyer, click the box, print their name and their title. Why would I have a title for a buyer that's like John Smith? You might not. That's a person, so they have no title. But there is a situation where Ching Wen might be buying it with her mom, with her dad, and then maybe one of her friends wants to join the purchase as an entity, like an LLC. Then they have a title. Okay. So you can use this areas to put buyer 3. This is where you put buyer number 4. This is where you put buyer number 5. And if you have 7 buyers, then just print another ASA for buyer number 6, buyer number 7, right here. Okay.
Ben, sorry to interrupt you. Is everyone seeing your screen where you're showing? Because I don't have that on mine.
Okay, well, I will put it back up and see. Can you see my ASA form?
Now I can, yes. Thank you.
Okay, so this is where you would list buyer 3, buyer 4, and buyer 5 right here. And write their name in, and if any, title. Okay, and they sign here. Now, the only thing is, you would check the box RPA, yes, but it should be asking you what are they signing, right? And when you're signing the buyer sign and they're signing this document, um, make sure they do or do not, they consistently match the two areas called liquidated damages and arbitration clause. These two sections must be consistent with one another because you need all parties' consent to enforce the liquidated damages or arbitration clauses. Okay. Now, if you choose the RPA, that's fine. That's only signing these buyers number 3, 4, and 5 are only signing your purchase contract if you check this box. But instead, it's probably more advisable that you go ahead and let me move this around. It's more advisable to actually list out everything that they're signing. So they're signing the RPA, the agency disclosure number 2. They're signing the FHDS. They're signing the Fair Appraisal Act that's on the what's it called? The PRBS is one of them. The Wire Fraud Advisory. They're going to be finding the S statewide buyer seller. They're doing the market condition advisory. So that's just in the beginning. Okay, you're going to use ASA again midway, right around the disclosure signing period, and then you're going to be a buyer number 3 signing TDS, buyer 3 signing blah blah blah. They're doing the buyer's ABID and listing. You can and every other disclosure like this and WCMD, the FLD, all that stuff. So when you have too many to go, don't worry, just list it all out and zip forms will automatically create additional addendum with the everything that they're signing. Okay, so that's how you fill it out midway for the disclosure period. But and then you get buyers number 3, 4, and 5 to also sign, every other form like the term